Hey guys, tonight we're crawling back in time to an era of mud, mustaches, and the kind of bathing situations that would horrify your local gym. You're in the trenches of World War I, and yes, your socks are wet again. Tonight, we're going to follow the soggy footsteps of a soldier who, perhaps out of desperation, genius, or both, patented a folding bathtub in the middle of the Great War. A small idea that brought a very big comfort. You'll meet him soon, but first, imagine the scent of mildew baked into wool, your boots squishing from the inside, and a constant drizzle that somehow knows exactly where your neck ends. You're here, and your only dry possession is a deeply questionable bar of soap. Welcome to history's least glamorous war spa. You probably won't survive this. I mean, statistically speaking, between trench foot, artillery, and the horror of canned beef, the odds aren't amazing. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from a cozy bed somewhere far from a battlefield, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where in the world you're drifting off. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through northern France, your feet making the unmistakable sound of a sponge squishing in a wet boot. It's late 1915. Your uniform, once proudly khaki, now resembles a large tea bag left too long in bog water. Your rifle is caked in mud, but more urgently, so are your toes. No matter how many times you wring out your socks, they never dry. You've begun to suspect that trench water might actually produce socks somehow. It rains again. Of course it does. It always does. The trench has turned into a winding, knee-deep moat, and your assigned dugout smells like boiled onions and unspoken regrets. You step over a collapsed sandbag and nearly lose a boot to the sucking, greedy earth below. You've heard whispers of worse things. Rats the size of cats, socks that grow mold while you're wearing them, and a soldier 2 trenches down who hasn't fully taken off his boots since last spring. Not out of stubbornness, mind you. They're just part of his feet now. And so begins your daily ritual. Wake up cold, get wetter, try to get warm, fail, inspect your toes for signs of trench foot. Repeat. Trench foot, by the way, is not just a fun nickname. It's a condition born of wet, cold, and neglect. Your skin begins to turn pale, then purple, then something you'd need a whole team of painters to describe. It hurts. It smells. And worst of all, there's no easy cure except, you guessed it, dry socks and a bath. Ah yes, a bath. That magical fantasy of standing water that doesn't contain lice, old shrapnel, or the remains of yesterday's bully beef stew. You think of porcelain tubs with clawed feet, of warm steam and lavender soap, of not having to share the water with 6 other muddy blokes and an inquisitive mouse. But instead, your only luxury is the occasional water ration. And it's not for drinking. No, your sergeant insists it's for scrubbing behind the ears, which is bold, considering you haven't seen your ears since August. Still, you try. You rub yourself down with a rag that may once have been a shirt. You dry off with your sleeve. You dab cologne behind your ears using a letter from home. It's not glamorous, but in the quietest, coldest moments, it keeps you human. One day, the unit receives something rare. A crate marked personal hygiene, experimental. You gather around, skeptical. Last time this happened, it was toothbrushes made of pig bristles and a single communal comb. But this time, out comes something curious. A metal frame, thin panels, canvas sides. A folded-up contraption the size of a violin case. Your corporal snorts. Looks like a chicken coop had a baby with a wheelbarrow. But not you. You squint. You touch the metal. It's cold. It's sturdy. It has hinges. Looks like a bath, you whisper. And it is. Kind of. A folding bathtub. The kind of thing that seems absurd in war. But also precisely the thing you and everyone else has been dreaming about since the socks went damp. It doesn't work right away, of course. The sides collapse once. The canvas sags in the middle. One poor chap steps in too early and goes straight through to the earth below. But it's a start. A ridiculous, lovely, muddy start. You don't know yet who invented it. You don't care. For now, you just watch the medic pour in a bucket of lukewarm water, the steam rising like a minor miracle. Someone lights a cigarette and offers you the first turn. For 5 full minutes, you are no longer a soldier. You are a human being with toes again. Historians still argue whether the folding bathtub made any real difference in the trenches. Was it used often? Did it really prevent illness? Or was it just a morale booster, a metal placebo in a sea of despair? You don't have the answer. You're too busy washing your knees. But what you do know is this. The second you step out, towel off with an old ration sack, and watch the next guy fumble with the soap, you feel better. Slightly less soggy. Slightly more civilized. And for once, your socks are dry. For now. You sit there on a ration crate, towel draped over your shoulders like you've just returned from a seaside holiday instead of a 14-day shelling rotation. The faint, steamy ghost of bathwater still clings to your skin. For 5 minutes, maybe 10, you feel like a human again. And all thanks to a collapsible metal contraption that shouldn't even exist in a place like this. Now, back in the trench, you're already filthy again, naturally, but the memory of the bath lingers. The envy in the other's eyes? Palpable. Even your commanding officer, a man with a face like a boiled ham, made a passing comment about requisitioning one for testing purposes. Which is code for, I want to be clean too. You begin to daydream. What if everyone had one of these? What if bath time was a scheduled part of trench life, like roll call or pretending to understand the French locals? It's a tempting fantasy, but you also know better than to expect luxury out here. This is a world of mud, shellfire, and the occasional squash tin of peaches that tastes like victory. And yet, the thought of a bath, not just water splashed on a face, not just rain down your back, but a full soak, is something that keeps creeping in, especially at night, when the lice make their presence known and the wind finds new seams in your uniform. So you start asking around. Who came up with it? Where did it come from? The whispers lead you toward someone higher up, Royal Navy, they say. Pilot, which only adds to the absurdity. What business does a man who lives in the sky have inventing something that rests on muddy ground? Enter Commander Charles Rumney Sampson. You hear his name for the first time from a grizzled corporal polishing a bayonet with a sock that absolutely shouldn't be touched with bare hands. Oh, Sampson, the man says, chuckling. Flying nutter, always fiddling with contraptions. Flew a plane under a bridge once. Came back down with a folding tub. You don't believe it at first, but the name sticks. Charles R. Sampson, a naval aviator, apparently one of the first to take flight from a moving warship. And also, allegedly, the man who brought the bath back to the battlefield. You imagine him now. Leather flight jacket, goggles perched on his forehead, mustache curled like a villain from a silent film. The kind of man who probably drank tea while steering an aircraft into enemy territory. And somehow, amid all that, he found the time to look at the mud-slicked misery of trench life and think, what we need here is a bath. Historians mostly remember Sampson for his aviation exploits, especially during the Gallipoli campaign. He flew reconnaissance, dropped messages, even took potshots at ground targets when the mood struck. But tucked inside his legacy is something stranger, a patent filed after the war for a collapsible bathing apparatus. A folding bathtub. You start to wonder, what moment led to this idea? Did Sampson walk past a row of shivering soldiers and think, someone should do something? Or was it simpler? Was he just tired of being crusty? The man was nothing if not practical. During the war, he famously attached a machine gun to a car, creating one of the first makeshift armored vehicles. So maybe the folding bathtub wasn't a fluke. Maybe it was just Sampson being Sampson. But here's the thing. Folding bathtubs weren't completely new. There were earlier versions used by explorers and campers. Some were canvas slings. Others resembled leather buckets you sat in awkwardly like a forgotten tea bag. The difference was that Sampson's version was sturdy, compact, and tailored for a war zone. It had a frame. It had logic. It had, dare you say, style. And while historians still argue whether Sampson personally used the design in the field, or if it was more of a post-war idea born from his memories of filth and funk, the fact remains. He filed the patent. He gave the soggy soldier something to hope for. You hear another rumor, whispered over mugs of weak tea one misty morning. Samson once insisted on bathing before every major briefing. Cleans the mind, he'd allegedly say. Whether that's true or not is beside the point. Sounds like him, a man too eccentric to die dirty. And honestly, can you blame him? Because let's be real, soap out here is barely soap. It smells vaguely of chalk and defeat. The water is usually either freezing or suspiciously warm from having sat too close to the cook fire. But the sensation of soaking your war-worn limbs in a tub, no matter how makeshift, is an act of rebellion against the misery. One evening, back behind the line, you meet an older soldier, been through it all. He carries a photo of his wife and a battered copy of Treasure Island. He's seen more mud than farmland. And as you talk, he mentions seeing one of Samson's tubs in use during the Gallipoli retreat. We thought it was a coffin at first, he laughs. Nearly buried the poor bloke. But it wasn't. It was a bath. And in those final chaotic days of the campaign, with everything crumbling, someone still found time to rinse off. That tells you everything you need to know about the human spirit in war. Some historians argue whether Samson ever envisioned his design becoming standard issue. Was it always just a novelty? A personal quirk? Or did he genuinely believe every soldier should have the right to a decent soak? Others suggest the bathtub patent was symbolic, a gesture of decency, dignity, and defiance in a world defined by grime. And while few models survive today, the very idea of it still feels radical. Back in your trench, you share the story with your mates. One laughs so hard he nearly spills his tea ration. Another looks thoughtful and says, "Wish I'd thought of it first." You fall asleep that night with the sound of shellfire in the distance, the smell of damp wool in your nose, and a mental image of Charles R. Samson reclining in a bathtub, goggles on, sipping tea as history falls apart around him. Honestly, if he did do that, you hope someone painted it. You're back at the edge of the makeshift officers' quarters. Nothing more than a reinforced dugout with sandbags, a warped wooden desk, and the unmistakable scent of old tobacco and wet leather. The story of Charles R. Samson has burrowed its way into your thoughts, like the ever-present trench rats. Persistent, oddly charismatic, and slightly absurd. You've started picturing him in your mind. Not just a naval officer, but a kind of wartime eccentric with a brain equal parts strategy and steampunk. The kind of man who probably sketched invention ideas in the margins of battle plans and once tried to fly with a teacup balanced on the dashboard. His reputation, as it turns out, precedes him. Samson, you've learned, wasn't just any pilot. He was one of the pioneers of naval aviation. In 1912, he flew a plane off a ship, a feat so dangerous it's basically skydiving with paperwork. He was known for risky maneuvers, dramatic flair, and a very strong opinion on proper grooming. If James Bond had an uncle who preferred baths to martinis, it would be Charles R. Samson. You hear from a sergeant with a surprisingly poetic soul that Samson's mustache was the stuff of legend, like two small hedgehogs curled up for warmth. Another claims Samson once kept a spare bar of soap in his pistol holster, just in case. Yet another insists that he never once smelled of war. Only lavender and occasional condescension. There's no doubt the man was memorable. His Gallipoli escapades are now whispered with reverence and a touch of amusement. He reportedly directed ground troops from a plane, dropped handwritten notes to units, and even participated in some early forms of aerial bombing, though in those days that sometimes meant pushing crates out of the cockpit by hand and hoping for the best. And yet, among all these high-flying achievements, it's the bathtub that somehow sticks with you. You imagine him in his tent after a day of reconnaissance, methodically unfolding his patented contraption, perhaps humming an off-key waltz. A kettle boils nearby. Tea is poured. And then, still in full uniform from the waist up, he steps in for a warm soak like a man determined to civilize war one bubble at a time. Historians still argue whether Samson designed the folding bathtub during his service or after the war, based on memory and mild trauma. Some say he crafted early versions in the field, testing them in remote outposts like an 18th century explorer with a washcloth. Others believe the whole concept came later, part of a post-war effort to bring some order to the chaos. The patent itself, filed in the early 1920s, is surprisingly detailed. It outlines a tub constructed of folding metal panels, canvas lining, and an easy-to-carry case. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't meant to be. It was meant to work, to be practical, to provide warmth and cleanliness in a world increasingly covered in soot and sadness. And maybe, just maybe, to give soldiers something to laugh about. You've read accounts that Samson was particularly concerned with the morale of his men. "A bathed man is a sharper man," he was once quoted saying, though whether that was motivational wisdom or an excuse to avoid meetings while soaking is up for debate. The military, of course, didn't leap at the idea. Folding tubs weren't exactly standard issue, but the design circulated. Prototypes were made. Some officers purchased them privately, and in more than a few cases, especially among higher ranks or behind-the-line encampments, Samson's idea became a quiet, lathered revolution. You think back to your own brief moment in the tub. The steam, the sudden absence of grime, the feeling of shedding your warskin like a tired snake. It wasn't just about hygiene. It was about identity, about remembering you're more than just a uniform, a rank, or a soggy set of boots. Samson seemed to understand that. According to one rumor, he once bathed before a nighttime mission, emerging from his tent smelling faintly of rosewater and steel. When asked why, he replied, "Because if I'm to die tonight, I shall do it as a gentleman, not a stink bug." That quote may or may not be real. The British press at the time was known to embellish. Still, it fits the image of the man. Brave, practical, and deeply committed to the power of clean armpits. You begin to wonder what other oddities he might have stashed in his tent. A waterproof monocle? A collapsible umbrella designed for the back pocket? A bayonet that doubles as a back scratcher? More than one historian has described Samson's post-war years as the golden era of tinkering. He didn't stop at bathtubs. Allegedly, he sketched ideas for portable gramophones, steam-powered kettles for field tea-making, and even a weatherproof deck chair. Some were patented. Others remained doodles. But of all his peculiar ideas, the folding bathtub was the one that made it out of the tent and into the muddy trenches, briefly, imperfectly, but impactfully. You find it oddly comforting that, in the middle of one of humanity's darkest chapters, someone paused and thought, this whole thing would be a lot better with a hot bath. That even amid explosions, rations, and the ever-present threat of mustard gas, a man could prioritize a bit of soap and steam. As the wind howls through the trench that night, and your boots once again succumb to the moist embrace of a forgotten puddle, you catch yourself humming something. A waltz? Maybe? Something old. Something warm. Maybe it's the Samson in you. Maybe it's just a desperate hope that someone, somewhere, remembered to bring the kettle. You hear the phrase again, folding bathtub, and it doesn't feel quite so silly now, especially not after last night, when you discovered a single dry patch of skin behind your knee and nearly wept with gratitude. You're starting to see this thing less as a novelty and more as a quiet miracle. And today, for the first time, you get to watch it unfold properly. The unit has made it to a rear staging area, temporarily blessed with a canvas shelter, a crate of lemon soap, and a water barrel that isn't frozen solid. The folding bathtub makes another appearance, still smelling faintly of brass and biscuits. This time, you help set it up. It clicks into place with a satisfying metallic snap. The sides, hinged at clever angles, fan out like the wings of a tired bird. A canvas insert stretches between the joints, taut and smooth. It's oddly elegant, as if someone designed it for camping in the Lake District, not soaking the war out of one's pores. You pour in a ration of warmed water and wait, arms crossed, trying not to look too eager. One of the lads, Private Harris, volunteers to go first. He steps in with a cautious reverence usually reserved for stepping onto a dance floor. A collective hush falls over the group. He sits. Water sloshes. "Blimey," he mutters, eyes closing. "I forgot my skin could feel like this." That afternoon becomes a kind of pilgrimage. Word spreads. Men come from 2 trenches over just to glimpse the miracle. Some bring spare soap. Others just watch, sipping tin mugs of ersatz coffee with envy and amusement. No one complains when Harris hogs the tub for a full 10 minutes. A chap even takes his boots off just to feel the steam on his toes. It occurs to you that this is the first time since deployment that anyone's queued for anything with actual excitement. Usually it's for bread or latrines. Today it's for cleanliness. The folding bathtub in this moment becomes a centerpiece. Not a gimmick, not a one-off, but an event. A happening. A blessed, bubbly spectacle. Of course, it has its flaws. It leaks slightly along the seams if overfilled. The canvas develops a small tear by day's end, easily patched, but a reminder that no invention survives first contact with army boots. One soldier accidentally sits on the wrong end and flips it, nearly baptizing himself in lukewarm shame. But still, it works. Somehow it works. Historians still argue over how widespread its use really was. Some claim only a handful of prototypes ever made it into service. Others insist they saw dozens in use behind the lines, especially in officer quarters. The patent documentation suggests production intent, but few physical units survive in museums. You prefer to believe in its presence, even if only briefly, because in a world of barbed wire and stale biscuits, the memory of a warm bath becomes something precious, something slightly holy. And in that moment, while watching your mates take turns soaking away their sorrows, you think, maybe this is what victory looks like. You wake up to the smell of boiled socks and burned oats, a breakfast delight known colloquially as trench porridge. Outside, the wind carries the familiar scent of wet leather and damp canvas. But today, something new is in the air. The slightly herbal waft of someone who's actually used soap. It's Harris, post-bath Harris. His neck is clean. His ears gleam. His attitude is dangerously close to cheerful. You can't stop thinking about the folding bathtub. A decision is made. Today you'll try it. No matter the mud, no matter the shelling. Even if someone important yells about wasting water. You spend the morning securing a small bucket of heated rainwater, boiled over a hissing camp stove that smells faintly of kerosene and regret. The others help set up the tub in the lee of a storage tent. It's shielded from wind, mostly. You even hang a coat for privacy, though it flaps open with every gust like a curtain in a slapstick play. You step in slowly. Water touches skin. You make a sound you haven't made in months. A sort of surprised hum, part delight, part disbelief. It's warmer than expected. Not hot, exactly, but warm enough to remind you what temperature used to feel like. You scrub. You soak. You sigh. The canvas sides hold firm. The joints creak slightly as you shift, but they hold. Someone has left behind a sliver of lemon soap. You use it liberally. It's over in minutes, but those minutes are luxurious, sacred. You step out reborn, wrapped in a blanket that has never felt so soft. It smells vaguely of biscuits and mothballs, but you don't care. Later that evening, by firelight, you sketch the bathtub in your notebook. A rough drawing. You write little notes. Hinge here. Canvas must be waterproof. Don't sit on left side. One of the officers notices. Instead of scolding you for unauthorized doodling, he asks for a copy. My brothers in the engineers, he says, might appreciate the design. This is how ideas travel in war. Not always through blueprints or orders, but through soggy notebooks and whispered stories. You pass the drawing along. Historians still debate whether soldiers in the trenches truly appreciated inventions like this. Did they see them as real solutions, or just distractions from the mud and terror? The letters home are mixed. Some mention the odd comfort of a bath. Others mock the absurdity of washing up between bombardments. But you know how you felt, and how Harris looked afterward, and how the lad who bathed next said he hadn't felt his toes in 3 weeks, but now he could tap dance. You sit by the fire and hear that familiar clink-clack of metal folding into place. The next bather is preparing. And suddenly, the trench doesn't feel quite so hopeless. Because if someone can unfold a bathtub here, then maybe other good things are possible too. You wake up to the sound of someone swearing gently in German, which is always an interesting way to start the day. Your boots are missing again, borrowed, apparently, by Private Higgins, who needed them as mud anchors. You sigh, shake out your second-best socks, still damp, and crawl out of the dugout. Today is bath day again, which means someone is trying to unfold the marvel of metal and canvas that passes for Samson's portable bathtub. You stroll over, chewing on the last bit of a ration biscuit, and find Corporal Dawes bent over the thing with the expression of a man reading a map to Atlantis. "How did this fold inwards again?" he mutters. You end up helping, which is to say you hold one end while he swears at the hinges. Eventually, with a pop, a creak, and a great deal of stubborn will, it springs open into something resembling a tub. You salute it. You're used to odd military equipment, but the bathtub, now worn and patched in places with mismatched canvas, has become oddly familiar, a quiet staple in the chaos. And someone, somewhere, had the bureaucratic stamina to push it into existence. Turns out that someone was still Samson. After the war, while most soldiers tried to forget about trench mud and rations with a shelf life longer than most monarchies, Samson went straight into paperwork. Real, soul-mangling paperwork. The kind you need a sturdy cup of tea and the patience of a monk to get through. He wanted to patent the folding bathtub. And in true British fashion, he did. The design, officially filed in the early 1920s, includes a rather poetic description of a bathing vessel comprised of a series of hinged panels forming a collapsible enclosure capable of retaining water. It's bureaucratically romantic, like someone proposing marriage in Morse code. The patent includes a series of diagrams. Hinges here, folded joints there, a lining of waterproof canvas, detachable for washing. It even outlines a carrying case no larger than a large book. Historians still argue whether it was ever produced at scale, but a few confirmed prototypes exist, hidden away in museums and private collections. Filing the patent wasn't easy. Samson had to navigate a web of military red tape, post-war Reconstruction bureaucracy, and a British patent office still traumatized by the invention of the inflatable hat umbrella. But he persisted. Why? Because comfort matters. You imagine the moment. Samson in a faded suit, hat off, explaining earnestly to a bored clerk how a folding bath could be the salvation of mankind, or at least their armpits. He may have exaggerated. You would too. Patents were no small feat in those days. It meant official blueprints, material tests, prototype demonstrations, and convincing at least one skeptical man named Jeffrey that the thing wouldn't spontaneously collapse mid-soak. Allegedly, one prototype did exactly that, dousing an unfortunate lieutenant in soapy water and bruised dignity. Still, the design held, and though the war was over, Samson's mind remained in the trenches. He once wrote in his notes that cleanliness had been as vital to morale as rations or letters from home. A clean soldier, he believed, fought better, laughed easier, and argued less about sardine distribution. The patent was granted, quietly, without fanfare, but in it, Samson preserved a tiny, collapsible piece of sanity from the war. Not a weapon, not a medal, a bath. You begin to appreciate the odd heroism in that. It wasn't about grandeur. It was about survival, about reclaiming a small piece of humanity from the mud. Later, as you sit with your feet soaking in the tub, lukewarm water lapping against your shins, you think of all the paperwork behind this moment. The pages, the sketches, the men in gray suits who stamped approvals while sipping tea. Also, you could have this absurd, precious bath. The wind rattles the canvas walls of your trench. Shells rumble in the distance. But for now, your toes are clean. The water steams gently. And somewhere in the folds of history, Samson is smiling, a towel around his neck and a patent in his pocket. It's sometime between dusk and how is it still raining o'clock, when you find yourself pondering something that never used to cross your mind before this war. Cleanliness as a form of resistance. Back home, a bath was just a bath. A place to warm up after a rainy day, soak after a long week, or read the back of a shampoo bottle in peace. But here, in the mud, surrounded by noise, in a trench that smells like onion soup and existential dread, a bath is sacred. And oddly enough, it's starting to make strategic sense. You notice it first in yourself. You feel sharper after a soak, less snappy, more patient, less likely to bite someone's head off over rations or which biscuit tin belongs to whom. And then you see it in the others too. Harris cracks fewer bleak jokes and starts humming again. Dawes stops threatening to duel the rats. Even Sergeant Blythe, who once growled at a pigeon for looking at him funny, seems softer, still terrifying, but now with slightly shinier boots. Historians have long debated the role of hygiene in trench warfare. They all agree it was miserable, but some argue that the real reason for soap and makeshift baths wasn't just about disease control, it was about morale. Because trench foot was only half the problem. The other half was a creeping, suffocating sense of dehumanization. When you're filthy, cold, and crawling with lice, it's easy to forget who you are. A bath reminds you. It says, hey, you're still a person. You still deserve comfort. You remember one briefing where an officer referred to such things as soft priorities. A bath? A waste of resources. Time better spent digging, patrolling, polishing boots. But even then, you knew. No one fights well when they feel like a swamp creature. In fact, during the war, there were entire units assigned to build makeshift bathhouses behind the lines. Old barns converted into rudimentary spas. Water trucked in or boiled from wells. Towels were borrowed, soap rationed, buckets recycled. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. And Samson's tub? It brought that concept right into the field, into the mud, into the space where showers didn't exist and morale was a fragile, soap-slicked thread. Today, after your brief turn in the tub, you find yourself more alert during patrol. You spot a tangle of barbed wire you'd usually overlook. You respond to orders faster. You even manage to write a letter to your sister without mentioning rats once. A personal best. It's funny, in a grim sort of way. This war has created monsters of metal and gas. But it's also created little things like folding tubs that act as armor for the soul. You overhear a medic explaining that clean soldiers get fewer infections from minor wounds. That washing up, even minimally, can reduce the risk of lice-borne fevers. He cites some pamphlet written in a tone so dry it could dehydrate a lake. But the facts stick. Clean soldiers stay in the fight longer. Bathing, oddly enough, saves lives. One chap swears his cough got better after a soak. Probably boiled the germs out of me, he says proudly, as if he's just discovered penicillin in his armpit. Another, Private Lunt, claims that his bath helped him dream again. Real dreams. Not flashbacks. Not field rations with legs. Actual dreams. Had one last night, he says over tea. Was swimming. In a lake. No bullets. No boots. Just water. I think my feet were still attached. You smile. And maybe that's the real magic of it. Samson may not have known the full impact of his invention. Or maybe he did. Maybe he looked at a collapsing empire of dirt and misery and thought, what can I fold into that space to make it just a little more bearable? Not a gun. Not a speech. A bathtub. And here you are, months later, still using it. Still grateful. You lean back against a sandbag wall. The sounds of a distant harmonica drifting through the chill. Your socks are clean, your boots drying nearby. The tub is packed up again, folded neatly like a trusted friend resting between adventures. It's ridiculous, really. All this reverence for something so simple. But that's war for you. The world shrinks. Comforts vanish. And suddenly, a warm soak becomes an act of defiance. A declaration that no matter how much mud you march through, you are not mud. You're still human. And if that's not worth a patent, you don't know what is. By now, the folding bathtub is more than a novelty. It's practically a trench celebrity. You've seen it repaired with wire, stitched with bootlaces, even blessed once by a chaplain who claimed that, if Samson could part the Red Sea, this Samson can part the grime. That may have been a joke. But no one laughed. Today, something different happens. Word spreads that a rival bath has appeared in a neighboring unit, a challenger to the throne, if you will. You wander over during lunch, holding a half-eaten potato biscuit, to find the interloping design. A kind of canvas bucket with stiff leather sides and an optimistic lad trying to sit in it without folding himself like laundry. It doesn't go well. This, says its owner proudly, is the Bingham model. German design. Collapsible. Sturdy. Smells faintly of cabbage. You peer inside. It looks less like a bathtub and more like something you'd use to trap raccoons. Still, it holds water. Sort of. Turns out, Samson wasn't the only one trying to reinvent cleanliness in combat. There were others. Engineers, tinkerers, officers with too much time and not enough soap. Their inventions ranged from the clever to the completely absurd. There were sponge sticks, wooden poles with soaked rags tied at the ends, allowing soldiers to dab themselves like royalty with trench juice. There were sanitation belts, which were essentially long strips of absorbent cloth worn under the uniform. One version was infused with vinegar, another with garlic, supposed to keep the lice away, someone tells you, or attract them politely. No one's sure. You even hear tales of the collapsible bidet. A French invention, naturally. It involved a hand pump, a rubber hose, and a level of ambition that frankly feels inappropriate for a battlefield. Historians still argue whether these devices were widely distributed or just experimental oddities. Some say the British High Command briefly tested a mobile washing unit mounted on a donkey cart. Others believe this was just a well-washed donkey. But the truth remains. Hygiene in war was a battlefield of its own. The enemy wasn't just the opposing army. It was disease, dirt, the creeping loss of dignity. So inventors fought back with gadgets, gizmos, and the occasional soap-scented miracle. One man you meet, Private Abu from the Indian Expeditionary Force, tells you how his regiment would boil neem leaves and use the water for cleansing. Smells awful, he grins. But even the lice run from it. Another soldier, from the Senegalese tirailleurs, carries a small pouch of crushed herbs and charcoal, mixed with water to scrub the skin. We learned it from our elders, he says. No need for canvas tubs when you have hands and the right soil. You realize then, cleanliness wasn't just a European obsession. Every culture brought its own rituals to the mud, and sometimes those rituals kept them alive. One evening, you pass by a field stove where a few lads are making what can only be described as soap soup. Melted bars diluted in water, with a splash of rum added, for morale. No one actually uses it for bathing, but the scent lifts everyone's spirits. It's strange how inventive people become when surrounded by discomfort. One officer even rigged up a rain-catching contraption that filtered water into a tin tub lined with newspaper. A poor man's spa, he called it, sipping tea while balancing on a plank above the flood. And the best part? None of it is official. It's all unofficial brilliance, the kind of problem-solving born from boredom and grime. Samson's bathtub may have had the patent, but in truth, the war produced 1,000 versions. Some better, many worse, all made with hope. You return to your own folding tub that night. It sits folded under a tarp, still damp, still waiting. You wonder what it would say if it could talk. Probably something like, "Stop putting your boots on me, please," because this humble thing, hinged and canvas-lined, is part of a much bigger story. A story of humans refusing to let filth define them. You take out your notebook again. This time you draw the Bingham model, and the sponge stick, and the donkey cart. You label each with sleepy pride. Who knows? Maybe one day someone will find your sketches and marvel at the ingenuity, or at least chuckle. And in a war where laughter is rationed tighter than socks, that would be enough. It's a few weeks later when you spot something peculiar while on supply detail. A folded Samson tub strapped to the side of a civilian wagon. Not a military cart. Not even a Red Cross unit. Just a dusty wooden wagon filled with odds and ends, lamp oil, soap bars, blankets, and camping gear? The driver, a wiry man with a pipe and a jaunty cap, grins at your puzzled expression. War surplus, he explains. Bought it at auction. Excellent for the outdoors. He wraps the folded tub affectionately. Saves your knees and your dignity. You blink. The folding bathtub, it seems, has left the trenches. You follow that thread, like pulling on a stray thread of wool that unravels a whole jumper. Turns out, once the war ended and the soldiers went home, the tubs didn't all stay behind. Some were sent to depots. Others ended up in army surplus stores. And some, it seems, hitched a ride into civilian life. Samson's little invention, born in the mud and misery of WW1, found a strange second act, the great outdoors. By the early 1920s, catalogs for leisure adventuring, a genre pioneered by wealthy eccentrics and former officers with too much free time, featured collapsible tubs right next to folding chairs and portable cookers. One ad even described it as ideal for alpine bathing or post-fishing refreshment. You imagine a former general sitting on a Swiss hillside, soaking in a Samson tub while puffing a pipe and humming a march. The absurdity is too delightful to ignore, and it didn't stop there. In England, several companies began producing their own versions. Some were exact replicas. Others added flourishes, built-in soap trays, floral print canvas, even clawfoot attachments. Folding luxury for the middle class. In France, the design caught on with camping clubs. One famous explorer reportedly insisted on bringing his tub on every expedition, including a trek through the Pyrenees. "The body must be purified," he wrote, "even if the feet are bleeding." Historians still argue whether Samson benefited financially from this boom. Some believe he sold the rights early for a modest sum. Others claim he never intended to profit at all, and was just amused to see his invention appearing in hotel pamphlets and scout manuals. Either way, the tub had gone public. It was no longer just a military secret, it was now a civilian comfort. One particularly enthusiastic reviewer in a 1924 camping magazine called it a marvel of collapsible engineering, perfectly suited for the discerning traveler who refuses to stink. You chuckle at that. Back in your current trench, a new posting, new faces, same mud. You overhear an officer reminiscing about his pre-war hiking days. "Had one of those folding baths," he says. "Took it up Ben Nevis. Got stuck halfway open. Sat in it anyway. Bliss." And it hits you. The bathtub never really left the war. It just adapted. Much like the soldiers who carried it, who folded themselves back into society, who found odd uses for what the war had left behind. Some used their trench experience to become writers. Others became farmers. A few, like Samson, became inventors, chroniclers, men who saw grime and found grace in engineering. Even today, you learn versions of the folding tub exist. In disaster relief kits, in survival gear, in camper vans. And though few know its story, its origins in the filth and fatigue of a war few want to relive, it survives. Not just as an object, but as a legacy. A testimony to comfort reclaimed in the unlikeliest of places. You imagine future campers, generations from now, unfolding their tubs under the stars, never knowing their connection to mud-soaked trenches and lemon-scented soap shared between friends. Maybe that's the best kind of legacy. Quiet, useful, unpretentious. You lean back on your pack and watch as the evening sun slants over the camp, catching the edge of your own battered tub. A dent here, patch there. It's not pretty, but it works. And like everything worth keeping, it has stories folded into it. Evening settles over the trench with its usual gray sigh, and as you sip your tin of weak tea, you start thinking about other strange inventions that have cropped up around you. The folding bathtub may be the darling of your unit, but it's far from the only curious contraption that's graced the mud. If war is a laboratory for chaos, then the soldiers are the unwitting scientists and the experiments are, well, something between genius and comedy. Take the pigeon parachute, for instance. You first saw one during a resupply drop, small silk canopies attached to wicker carriers, each holding a war pigeon ready to deliver a message the old-fashioned way. The idea was noble. Keep the pigeons alive during airdrops. The result? Slightly panicked birds descending like feathered fruit. Then there's the bulletproof bowler hat, yes, really. A prototype issued briefly to officers who needed a bit of discretion on the streets of London during air raids. Stylish, dome-shaped, and allegedly capable of stopping a low-caliber round. Most officers declined to test this in real-world conditions. One man did. He lived, but reported a considerable headache. Historians still debate whether these inventions were taken seriously or whether they were brilliant flukes in a sea of desperate improvisation. There's something almost endearing about them. Little pockets of hope wrapped in brass and stubbornness. In your own unit, there's Corporal Ames. He's made a tea-filtering device out of wire mesh, a sock, and what you strongly suspect is part of a periscope. Cuts out the mud, he says proudly. Only leaves the flavor of disappointment. Private Ndlovu from South Africa carries a handmade water purifier, constructed from charcoal, gravel, and a bit of string. He says his uncle taught him how to build it during drought seasons. Cleaner than your bathwater, he jokes one evening. He's probably right. Some of the gadgets are sanctioned, issued from above with a rubber-stamped promise of usefulness. Others are purely soldier-born, forged in boredom, necessity, or a desperate attempt to distract oneself from the constant damp. You once saw someone wearing a coat made entirely from stitched-together sandbags. He claimed it was shell-proof. It wasn't, but it was warm. And then there's the contraption Sergeant Blythe constructed, a sort of periscope-mounted shaving mirror designed to let him groom while monitoring no man's land. "If I'm going to get shot," he said dryly, "I'd like my sideburns to be even. Even the rats have inspired invention. There's a lad in D Company who rigged a trap that involves a tin of jam, a pulley, and what looks like half a harmonica. He hasn't caught a rat yet, but he insists the jam is for calibration. It becomes clear that the folding bathtub is part of a broader, unspoken effort to reclaim bits of normalcy in a world that's anything but. These gadgets, ridiculous or not, serve a purpose. They make the trenches a little less grim, a little more human. They remind you that even here, knee-deep in mud, sleep-deprived, and dreaming of fresh bread, people are still trying to improve things, still reaching for comfort, or at least entertainment. You sketch them in your notebook. The pigeon parachute drifting like an embarrassed handkerchief, the bulletproof bowler with its dented dome, the sock tea filter with bits of leaf still stuck to the edge. One day, someone will find this notebook, and they won't believe half of it. But maybe they'll understand the spirit behind it all. Because war isn't just fought with rifles. Sometimes, it's fought with scissors, string, and a stubborn refusal to let misery have the last word. You rinse your hands in the folding tub before turning in for the night. Someone's heated the water slightly, and the warmth stings your fingers in a way that feels almost luxurious. You glance at the periscope shaving station, the sandbag coat drying on a rack, the tea sock hanging like laundry, and you smile. History may forget these details, but you won't. The rain lets up for once, revealing a pale sky that feels almost fictional. It's the kind of day where birds might sing if there were any left. The mud starts to dry in thick, reluctant patches. You take it as a sign and decide, today's the day you follow Charles R. Sampson around for a full 24 hours. Not literally, of course, but you do your best to live like him, walk in his polished boots, and see the war through his oddly pampered lens. You start with tea, properly brewed, if barely. You prop your mess tin on a flat stone, carefully measure out your last ration of leaves, and wait with the patience of a monk in wet socks. The result is barely warm, slightly metallic, and smells like it's seen things. You sip it anyway. "Sampson would approve," you whisper, then a shave. You borrow Sergeant Blythe's periscope mirror contraption, angle it to catch what light you can, and run a blunt razor down your cheek. It snags, complains, but by the end you no longer resemble a cryptid. You even wipe your face with a clean rag and try not to think about where it was last week. You picture Sampson at Gallipoli, stepping out of his bath and adjusting his collar before commanding an air raid. It sounds absurd, but that's what makes it so compelling. He wasn't reckless. He was just composed, impossibly composed. Your day unfolds in imitation. Mid-morning, you polish your boots, not for utility, but because Sampson did. You hum a little military march as you do it, though the only music nearby is a man badly whistling through missing teeth. You volunteer for message duty, hoping to see more of the rear area Sampson country. Tents and telegraph poles and the smell of diesel and powdered eggs. You spot an officer's tent with a canvas bathtub set up beside it, steam rising gently. A man reads a novel while soaking. His mustache is glorious. You nod in silent respect. By noon, you're hungry. You improvise a Sampson lunch. Hardtack, preserved beef, and the last bit of tea. You eat slowly, savoring it as though you're in a seaside cafe and not sitting on a sandbag next to a collapsed latrine. Context is everything. Afternoon patrol? You march with posture. You inspect the horizon with the solemnity of a philosopher. A pigeon flutters overhead, perhaps scouting for a parachute. You salute it. Evening comes, and with it, your piece de resistance. A bath. You set up the folding tub in a dugout corner, shielded from the wind. Water is scarce, so you pool rations with two mates. They agree on one condition. You narrate your experience like Samson probably would. You step in straight-backed. Gentlemen, you say, today we reclaim civility. They applaud. You soap up with theatrical flair. The canvas creaks, the water sloshes. Someone plays a harmonica in the background. You pretend it's a string quartet. For 5 minutes, the war vanishes. Historians still argue whether Samson's personal habits affected his leadership. Was he respected, admired, secretly mocked for his bathtub obsession? Probably all three. But no one denies that he got things done. He innovated. He flew under bridges. He bathed in the middle of a battlefield. And he inspired moments like this. You climb out, towel off with a scarf, and sit back with a sigh. One of your mates says, "You look taller. I feel cleaner than God." You reply. The day winds down. You write a page in your journal just like Samson would have, notes on the bathwater, the wind direction, the relative elegance of your mustache. You even sign your name with a flourish. That night, you sleep better than you have in weeks. Not because of the bath itself, not even the tea, but because for one full day you remembered who you were before all this. You lived like someone who believed in dignity, even in a place built to strip it away. And somehow, improbably, that made all the difference. The morning arrives with the dull ache of bureaucracy. Not in your joints, though they do complain, but in the form of a courier stumbling through the trench, arms full of paper. Orders, forms, reports. The kind of paperwork that could sink a battleship before breakfast. You're handed a packet with the unpromising title, Field Sanitation Directive, Interim Bathing Measures. The seal is smeared. The staples are bent. The signature at the bottom looks like someone sneezed in cursive. You sigh and flip it open. Inside is a treasure trove of military absurdity. Diagrams of soap distribution. Flowcharts for towel allocation. A clause labeled B4.1b. Recommended fold angles for portable bathing devices. You blink at that one. It's real. You pass the papers to Corporal Dawes, who reads with increasing incredulity. Do they think we have folding angles? We're using rocks to hold the thing up. The folding bathtub, it seems, has triggered a minor paperwork revolution. Samson's original patent, now passed through the digestive tract of military logistics, has birthed an entire subdepartment, tactical hygiene deployment. Or, as one soldier calls it, the soap squad. The paperwork includes a requisition form for a new canvas insert, triple signed and needing approval from an officer, a quartermaster, and someone referred to only as bathing liaison, Northern Zone. You find that both hilarious and deeply concerning. Samson's invention, once born of need and stubborn ingenuity, has now entered the tangled world of memos, stamps, and acronyms. One field report mentions a tub that was rendered non-operational due to a missing plug. A follow-up report documents the plug's return via diplomatic pouch. This took 3 weeks. Historians still argue whether this kind of bureaucracy helped or hindered innovation. Some say it protected standards and ensured supplies. Others believe it turned clever ideas into soggy red tape. You lean toward the latter. Later that day, you're visited by an actual hygiene inspector, a man in immaculate boots who introduces himself as Lieutenant Fairclough, attached to Logistics, Sanitation Division. His mustache is combed. His clipboard is ironclad. He asks to see the tub. You unfold it for him. He crouches beside it like a museum curator examining a rare fossil. He says, improvised repair here, unregulated canvas. This strap isn't standard issue. That's a bootlace, you offer. He nods. Creative, but unapproved. He begins to list non-compliances. Angle deviation, inconsistent soak duration, inadequate rinsing station. You stop him when he suggests measuring splash radius. Sir, you say gently, we're using this thing in a hole. It's either splash or stew. To his credit, he laughs. A short, clipped sound like a man sneezing into a dictionary. He does not write you up. Fairclough leaves behind a new regulation sheet. It includes approved bath times, group usage schedules, and something called a cleansing morale index. No one knows what that means, but it's fun to say. You post the sheet beside the latrine. Someone adds a doodle of Samson in a top hat, soaking in a tub labeled strategic asset. The mood in the trench is lighter than usual, because even when bureaucracy threatens to strangle common sense, there's still a bathtub under a tarp, ready to be unfolded. Still a bar of soap passed around like treasure. Still a spark of rebellion in doing something simple, something human, without 5 signatures and a stamped requisition. Later that night, you and Harris soak your feet in the tub and laugh about the phrase, sanitation liaison. It sounds like a job invented during a very boring lunch. You imagine Samson himself, sitting behind a desk in a post-war office, wading through these exact forms. Did he chuckle? Did he roll his eyes? Did he ever fill out a report that said, bathtub used successfully? Soldiers. Slightly happier? Maybe. Or maybe he just folded his invention up, tucked it under one arm, and let it speak for itself. In this war, paperwork may be king. But sometimes, all it takes is warm water and a little defiance to remind you who you really are. You find the letter tucked beneath a biscuit tin. The envelope is damp, the ink a little smudged, but the handwriting is surprisingly elegant, looped and careful, as though the writer feared disturbing the page too much. It's addressed simply to Mother, but scrawled beneath that in pencil. Read aloud if I'm late for dinner. Bath night today. It's Private Lunt's letter, and with his permission, you read it. He writes about the folding bathtub, not with sarcasm or complaint, but with a tone of reverence you'd usually reserve for birthdays or butter. He says the bath reminded him of his grandmother's kitchen basin, the one she used to soak her feet after market day. He says he closed his eyes in the tub and smelled lavender, even though the soap was clearly lemon, and he suspects someone washed a sock in it first. This sparks something in the others. Soon, you're passing around letters, old and new, each one carrying glimpses of soldiers trying to explain the absurd, sacred, hilarious experience of getting clean in the filth of war. One French soldier writes to his cousin in Lyon, describing a canvas chalice of warmth he shared with 6 others in a barn behind the Marne. He includes a diagram. The drawing is ambitious. The tub has feet, human ones. Another, a Gurkha corporal, writes to his sister about bathing with river water heated over ammunition crates. The water had bits of leaf, bullet, and soul, he says. But my scalp remembered peace. You receive a letter yourself. It's from your brother serving in the artillery corps. He's heard of those ridiculous bath kits and is skeptical. Aren't you just sitting in a warm puddle with strangers? He writes. You grin. You write back, yes, and it's glorious. You start collecting these bath stories. Not formally, there's no archive, no catalog. Just stories whispered, shared, and sometimes written with smudged fingers in tiny slivers of calm. One lad, barely 16, confesses that the first time he bathed in the field, he cried. Not for home, he writes, but because I remembered how my skin used to smell when it was mine. Historians still argue whether these personal accounts are reliable. Memory plays tricks, they say. Soldiers exaggerate. Maybe the tubs weren't as common as the stories suggest. But sitting there in your trench, watching Harris towel off with a piece of curtain someone liberated from a nearby farmhouse, you know better. The stories are true because they're felt. Because the folds of the tub held not just water, but memory. One evening, someone suggests writing a letter from the bathtub. A dispatch from the depths, he calls it. You volunteer. You sit in the warm canvas, notebook balanced on your knees, and write. Dearest whoever finds this, I am currently soaking in what may be the last bathtub in France. It smells of lemons, ambition, and mild mildew. The water is lukewarm at best, and my knees stick out like disappointed elbows. But for the first time in days, I feel like something other than a mud statue. If I survive this war, I shall bathe daily. If I don't, bury me with soap. You pass the note around. Someone adds, P.S. Tell Mother I was clean at the end. The tub is folded away again before dusk. The letters are tucked into pockets, sleeves, helmet linings, and somewhere in the distance, the world continues to unravel. But here, in this narrow strip of earth, there are still men who write about baths, who share stories not of blood, but of bubbles, not of death, but of rinsing behind the ears. And somehow that feels revolutionary. The weather has turned again. Shocking, really. Rain slinks back into the sky like it never left, and the trench resumes its regular schedule of dripping walls and squelching floors. But today you're not so bothered, because today the folding bathtub is back in action. It's battered now. The canvas has been patched in 4 different fabrics, each a different shade of improvised. One leg is slightly bent, and the whole thing lists gently to starboard when full. But it still holds water, and that's all that matters. Private Dobbins, usually known for snoring and hoarding socks, has the honor of first soak. He's a large man. You watch with some trepidation as he lowers himself into the bath, the frame groaning like an old piano. It holds. He exhales with a blissed-out ah, like he's just found the true purpose of life. You sit nearby, watching the steam rise off the tub and into the damp air. Someone's made a little windscreen from biscuit tins and mess plates to shield the bather. A homemade spa, war style. It's a peaceful scene, but your thoughts drift again to Samson and to the ever-ongoing debate among historians, engineers, and armchair experts. Was the folding bathtub a brilliant innovation, or just a curious footnote in military history? You've read snippets of those arguments, scribbled in post-war pamphlets and dusty journals. Some call Samson a visionary. Others scoff at the idea of bathtub warfare. One historian claimed the tub never reached frontline utility, while another insisted it was as vital to morale as dry socks or a well-timed biscuit. Who's right? Does it matter? You think of what the folding tub has meant to you and your mates, how it's become more than a gadget, how it sparked laughter, letters, rituals, how it made cleanliness seem possible again, even noble. In the great index of war inventions, it might not rank high. It didn't shoot anything. It didn't encrypt codes. It didn't roll across battlefields on treads or wings. But what it did do was remind you that you're a human being. That's something. And anyway, the line between genius and absurdity is always thin. Consider the pigeon-guided missile, the cat bomb, the anti-tank dog program. All real, all funded, all failures. Compared to that, a bath that folds? Practically divine. You write this in your notebook. History tends to remember weapons. Maybe it should remember warm water, too. And while you write, you hear Dobbins humming something. An old folk tune, badly off-key. His eyes are closed. His shoulders, usually tense from rifle drills, are loose and rounded. "You all right in there?" someone calls. "I'm floating," he murmurs. You smile. Later, once he's toweled off with a curtain fragment, he offers his thoughts on the great bathtub debate. Doesn't matter if it's genius or not. Just matters that it's here. Simple. True. That night, you overhear someone whisper, "Imagine if every soldier got a bath like this once a week." And then someone else adds, "Imagine if wars came with health clubs." You all chuckle, but the idea lingers. A war that prioritizes comfort, that treats morale as more than just slogans, that gives soldiers not just rations and rifles, but dignity. Historians will keep debating. That's what they do. But for you, the debate ends every time the canvas fills with steam and someone sighs like they're sinking into a memory. In the end, maybe Samson didn't invent the perfect bathtub. Maybe he just gave us permission to want one. The wind is gentle tonight, for once. No screaming gusts, no sideways rain. Just a soft rustle through the canvas above you and the rhythmic splash of a lad rinsing off his elbows in what's left of the folding bathtub water. It's nearing the end of your shift. Not just tonight's patrol, but this chapter of the war. You've heard whispers of rotation, of leave, of a hot meal somewhere that doesn't come in a tin. You don't trust it, not yet. But still, the mood in the trench has shifted. Just slightly. Just enough to taste the idea of clean sheets. The folding tub has been folded, packed, and patched more times than anyone can count. It doesn't open quite right anymore. It wheezes a bit when the hinges click, but it's still here, and that, honestly, feels like an achievement. You sit beside it, boots off, steaming cup of tea in hand. The others are asleep or snoring or off scribbling letters. You're alone with the canvas, the stars, and a small pile of your own memories. You reach for your journal, the battered one with the doodles and folded corners. You flip back through its pages. There's the first sketch of the tub before you even touched it. There's the tea strainer contraption, the bidet diagram, the letter you wrote while soaking. There's that quote from Dobbins, "Just matters that it's here." You nod to yourself and write one final note. War strips you down. Bathing helps build you back, even if it's in a puddle with hinges. Historians, of course, will continue to debate Samson's place in the grand, tangled narrative of the First World War. His bathtub patent will sit quietly in dusty archives, somewhere between field radios and trench periscopes, occasionally rediscovered, occasionally chuckled at. But for the soldiers who unfolded that canvas, poured in boiled rainwater, and scrubbed the dirt of death away for even just a few minutes, it wasn't a joke. It was salvation. And tonight, as your feet soak in the last warm inch of water, as the stars blink gently in approval, you feel, however briefly, that you've won something. Not the war, but yourself. So now your boots are off. The trench has gone quiet, and the folding bathtub, wobbly, battered, steam-streaked, sits folded one last time in the corner, like an old friend settling in for sleep. You stretch out on your cot, the canvas creaking softly beneath you. There's a chill in the air, but it's the kind that settles gently, not the kind that bites. You can still feel the warmth on your skin from your last soak. That sweet, surprising heat that creeps up your spine and whispers, "You made it." Your hands are clean. Your socks are dry. You exhale. Let the sound of the wind ease into your chest. Let the memory of warm water and lemon soap settle behind your eyes. Maybe imagine yourself somewhere else now, in a cabin near a lake, a steaming bath on a wooden porch, the smell of pine and faint tea leaves drifting in the air. You've walked through mud. You've marched through cold. You've laughed at the ridiculousness of it all. And somehow, against odds and rationing and paperwork, you found comfort. You found the folding bathtub. Let it stay with you tonight. Not the cold or the noise or the chaos, but the small joy of a warm soak when everything else said no. Let your breath slow. Let your eyelids grow heavy. And remember, in the middle of war, someone stopped to make a bath. Good night and sweet dreams.